Okay, so let's see if a trunk is formed between switch 1 and switch 2, and if a trunk is formed between switch 2 and switch 3. This is the capture between switch 1 and switch 2. I'm going to do a search for DTP. So I've named the switches to make it easy to know which switch is sending DTP messages. Cisco switch 1, Cisco switch 2. So again, this is the link between these two switches. If we look at dynamic trunk protocol, notice operating administrative mode is access auto. Operating administrative, ISL negotiated. So it looks like they may negotiate to use ISL. Trunk status is access auto. And what I'll do is just make this bigger so we can see the full Wireshark capture. Notice trunk operating status is access. Trunk administrative status is auto. In other words, auto has been used on that switch. Now this is switch 1. And I could show you that by looking at the console of the switch. So console of switch 1. Show interface trunk firstly shows us that no trunks are formed. But notice show interface gigabit 00 switch port. What you'll notice here is this command shows the interface. Interface is a switch port. Administrative mode is dynamic auto. Operational mode is static access. In the Wireshark capture, we see operating status is access. Administrative mode is auto. So administrative mode is dynamic auto over there. That's what we see here. Static access is the operational mode. So operating mode is access. So at this point, there's no trunking on that port. The port is acting as an access VLAN in VLAN 1, as you can see over there. Negotiation of trunking is on, but a trunk is not formed. And as I go through the messages, I mean, you must be careful looking at the very first messages. Go and look at the later messages to see if the state changed. Notice still access auto. Trunk type is ISL negotiated. They would negotiate to use ISL if one of the sides negotiated. Switch 2 is also set to access auto. So the point is, notice over here, DTP, operating administrative mode, access auto, operating administrative, ISL negotiated. Both of these switches are using DTP. I'm searching for DTP messages, and we can see DTP messages, but they set to mode auto. Mode auto, or dynamic auto, as we can see here, means that that side will not negotiate to form a trunk. The other side would have to initiate trunking. Here's switch 2. Show interface gigabit 00 switch port. Notice dynamic auto. That is the administrative mode. Operational mode is static access. So they both configured to use dynamic auto because neither of them initiate a connection to the other side. They're both passively waiting basically for the other side to initiate trunking. Trunking is not formed. So there's no trunk formed between switch 1 and switch 2. I won't use the show trunk command on switch 2 yet because we want to see what happens on the right hand side. But notice here, show interface trunk, no trunk is formed on switch 1. Okay, so I kind of hinted at it. What do you think is going to happen between switch 2 and switch 3? Here's the Wireshark capture between switch 2 and switch 3. I'll filter for DTP once again. Here's switch 3 messages. Notice the difference. Dynamic trunk protocol, access desirable, operating administrative mode, ISL.1Q. So that's different to what we saw on the other side. If we look at switch 2 on this link, notice trunk auto 802.1Q negotiated. So a little bit different. Notice switch 2, switch 3. One side is using auto, the other side is using desirable. So if I go right down to the end, this is switch 2. Trunk status is type trunk. Trunk value is trunk auto. Trunk operating status is a trunk. Now if we go back to the other switches, so this is switch 2 talking to switch 1, and we look at the trunk status, notice trunk status is access. And I don't know if that's confusing, so let me show you on the diagram. So on the left-hand side, switch 2 to switch 1. This is the capture between switch 1, switch 2. Notice operating status is access. This is an access port. But on this side, notice trunk operating status is trunk. That side's access, right-hand side is a trunk. It's become a trunk. Trunk administrative status is auto. This side it's also auto, but because switch 3 initiated the trunk, notice it says desirable here, a trunk was formed between switch 2 and switch 3. So, because switch 3 initiated the trunk, because it's set to desirable, a trunk is formed. We can see that once again by looking at the console of the switches. So on switch 3, show interface gigabit 00 switch port. Notice command shows administrative mode dynamic desirable. Encapsulation used is .1Q. Operational mode is trunk. It's operating as a trunk using .1Q. Show interface trunk. We can see that. Encapsulation is .1Q. Trunking is enabled. Now if we have a look on the other side, it's a little bit different here. Show interface trunk. On this side, it's negotiated to use .1Q and trunking is enabled. Whereas this side, the encapsulation is .1Q. And the reason for that is I explicitly configured the encapsulation as .1Q and set it to dynamic desirable. I wanted to show you a trunk that was negotiated with DTP and using .1Q rather than ISL. If I had not put this in, the switches would have actually negotiated to form an ISL trunk. These switches will use ISL first and then .1Q. So I wanted to explicitly force it to use .1Q. So they will try and use ISL, but if they can't, then they'll use .1Q. But again, I've overridden that, or I forced the switch to use .1Q. Whereas this side, notice, it could have used ISL or .1Q. So again, on switch 3, if we go up here, notice trunk desirable .1Q. Whereas on switch 2, trunk auto .1Q negotiated. So notice trunk desirable .1Q, trunk auto .1Q negotiated. One side was forced to use .1Q, the other side negotiated to use .1Q. Okay, so in summary, left-hand side doesn't become a trunk because both sides are set to auto. Right-hand side does become a trunk because one side was set to dynamic desirable, as we can see over there, and uses .1Q. On this side, show interface trunk. The only trunk that was negotiated is on gigabit 01. Okay, how are you doing? Are you able to answer these questions? Do you enjoy this? Please give me feedback. Do you enjoy these kind of quiz questions?